I am pleased to nominate Claudine A. Cloutier to the position of Associate Justice of the Superior Court. I submit this nomination on the advice and consent of the Executive Council pursuant to Part 2, Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm enclosing the nominee's resume for your convenience. Sincerely, Charles D. Baker, Governor of Massachusetts.
That wasted 30 seconds of the 3 minutes.
And now we'll hear from the first witness.
Thank you. I'll go first.
Thank you.
I'll let Attorney.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good afternoon, sitting councilors. I appreciate the honor to be here before you to give some great testimony on a very special person to my immediate right. Been fortunate enough to sit in this same spot and give testimony prior to this, and I know from Councilor Kennedy that brevity is key. So I can't control the man that's going to speak from behind me. He may go longer, but this will be rather. This is a rather momentous occasion for not only the candidate, but for our law firm. I've had a great opportunity of working side by side Claudine Cloutier for the last 20 years. She's truly a remarkable woman. She has a work ethic and is built from fabric that just is quite uncommon in these days. I have countless memories of her temperament, and her overall excellent lawyering. But as always, Claudine's actions have spoken louder than her words. If she did not have a selfless nature and a strive to her higher calling, she wouldn't be in front of you. Her presence on the bench will be amazing for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. At Catcher's Law Group, we will be missing her, and her absence will be felt for years to come. However, there's no doubt that she's on to a higher place and a place meant for a wonderful person like her. I thank you all for allowing me to testify today. Most of all, I thank you, Claudine, because having known you to be a better person.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your presence as always, Sean.
Thank you.
Catches.
Thank you, Counselor. John Ferreira was kind enough to defer his half hour to me. Yes.
We're very timely.
Well, let me just be very, very brief. It's a little bittersweet that I'm here today, losing a colleague, a partner, unable to communicate with a good friend on a daily basis. But Claudine came into our law firm in the mid-90s. Came in as a clerk out of the Superior Court. She came in basically in a civil litigation section, doing a lot of the paperwork, discovery. It was cemented her reputation, at least in my eyes, in the future that was going to be hers. Was in the mid-90s, we had a Teamster truck driver injured in Georgia. And everybody was asked, who wants to go down to an outlying county? It wasn't Atlanta. It was an outlying county in Georgia to try this case. Because nobody raised their hand. But Claudine, who had been out for a brief period of time, stepped forward. Now, how would you like to be a single, white, Catholic female attorney trying a jury trial in the outlying and severe outlying counties of Atlanta? It would make Suffolk County look like Nantucket. I'll tell you that without hesitation. And she comes back with a verdict of $600,000. And this was not a catastrophic case. It was a back injury that any of us attorneys who have handled this case would say was sort of a run-of-the-mill injury. And from that moment forward, she began to excel as a litigator, a female litigator. And back in the 90s, you didn't see too many female litigators in the Superior Court trying cases. You see more now. And during those years, she has progressed handling our most complex cases, expertly, with high ethics. And the Commonwealth is really getting a great, great lawyer. But in addition to a great lawyer, what you're getting is a great person. She grew up in Fall River in a 3-decker. Many of you, I don't know if it's a 3-family, 3-decker, being from New Bedford, Massachusetts, we call them 3-deckers.
Yeah.
And her family was middle class. She went to Durfee High School, went on to Yale University and Suffolk Law School. She has remained devoted to her community, still lives in this three-family house, Decker house. She, once again, devoted to her church. She heads up the Durfee Scholarship Committee. She's a tireless worker on behalf of her religion, and she is very, very philanthropic. In fact, we have bonuses every 3 years in our law firm, and the running joke is that, what charity do you want us to send this check to, Claudine? So you're really getting a great person, a person who wants to do some good, and you don't get them very often. I do follow politically what's going on. Someone who's probably taken a 75% pay cut to hopefully secure this spot on the Superior Court. So I'm going to miss her, but this is what her lifelong ambition has been, and I would hope that you would confirm.
Clear to me that you've been underpaying her for a long time.
Yeah.
Any questions from the council?
Oh, thank you for coming.
Council Iannella? Council Iannella? Some questions, huh?
No, I don't have any questions. I have so much respect for George Ketchy, so I saw Sean earlier. They're two superstars.
Absolutely.
Talking about workers' comp.
Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you, thank you. All right, anyone else here to speak in favor of the nominee? Anyone to speak against the nominee? Welcome, Representative Hendrick.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
My first session.
The floor is yours, and if you'd like to introduce anyone, feel free.
Thank you, Councilor Ferreira. I'd like to introduce Brian Dara and Alice Bronstein, who have joined us here today, and thank you folks for coming. Brian's been my partner at Ketch's Law Group forever, and he was my initial mentor at Ketch's Law Group, so it's an honor to have him here. Thank you to the council for inviting me. I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here, and thank you to Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito for nominating me. All the people that I've met through this process have been tremendously impressive to me, and the amount of hours that have gone in the judicial selection and vetting process has been eye-opening to me, and I appreciate the hours that the Judicial Nominating Commission, the Joint Bar Committee, Robert Ross and Lauren Green Petrino have spent on vetting the candidates. And I want to thank George and Sean for their testimony today, as well as Brian, Judge Armin Fernandez, Ed Lambert, Barry McDonald for their recommendations. And I also like to thank Katie Babin, Emily Gauthier, and Valerie McCarthy, whose work behind the scenes has just been so helpful to certainly me, and I suspect all of the candidates. One of the most gratifying and humbling results of living through this application process that I've experienced is the conversations that it's prompted from defense counsel that I have battled with and with whom I've had much respect for a number of years. And what was very great for me to hear was the repeating sentiment that I had the right temperament for the job, because it's not something that I much had thought about before that. And so to hear that repeatedly from the people I've been in the trenches against for years was truly humbling and encouraging, and it buttressed my confidence that I would be a good addition to the Superior Court. From my friends and family, the most touching response that has resonated with me is that my mother and father would be so proud. I wish they were alive to be with me in person today, but certainly I know that they're with me. I am the fourth and youngest child of Cecile and Richard Cloutier, both of whom were born and raised in Fall River. My mother learned how to speak French before learning English, her parents both being products of the migration from Quebec to Fall River to work in the mills. Through her tremendous determination, she became a registered nurse who ensured that her schedule would allow her the time to be home with her children during the day. My dad was the son of a police officer and retail worker. He was a Marine reservist like all of his brothers, and he worked as a dairy and frozen food manager in a grocery store for most of my life. Both of my parents instilled a tremendous work ethic in all of their children, and the ever-present understanding was that being a good person was the most important pillar of any true success. They set high standards for all of us, and I don't think that I've met those standards quite yet, but it is very satisfying for me to think that I would make them proud here today. I thank my siblings and my in-laws, my nephews, my niece, and my friends, not only for proofreading my application materials, but more importantly, for being a constant reinforcement of my moral compass. I've long recognized that I've been abundantly blessed by the people that have been around me, and I therefore have an increased responsibility to give back and improve the conditions of others when I can. Going from my neighborhood parochial school, where families knew each other for sometimes generations, to Durfee High School, to Yale, exposed me to many different perspectives. When I first decided to enter law school, I wasn't sure in what area I wanted to practice. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to practice or to apply my degree in some other way. But I remember sitting in a courtroom in Roxbury District Court where my college roommate's father, Judge Gordon Martin, was sitting as a judge. I didn't yet dare to think that that would be a possibility for me, but I did recognize what a great responsibility he had and how eloquently he exercised it. After law school, I had the fantastic opportunity to clerk in the Superior Court, and that planted a small thought that perhaps one day I'd have the honor to serve on the bench. For the past 26 years, I've had the privilege of representing people from all walks of life who are dealing with many consequences of injury, often catastrophic, sometimes death, often fearing the future while dealing with physical pain and facing uncertain economic prospects. What I've learned about civil practice, construction sites, various products, medicine, vocational analysis, etc., pales in comparison to the understanding that I've had to develop of the human condition, and perhaps most importantly, I've learned how to listen with compassion. I am eternally grateful for the opportunity Ketch's Law Group has provided to me to combine the analytical and the human, to have had a very fulfilling career as a litigator, and to impact my clients in a positive way. I hope that you will allow me to serve this Commonwealth to apply what I've learned while expanding my knowledge and understanding of the diverse matters that I would likely face. I understand that if my nomination is approved, I will have much to learn, but I promise to be diligent and to do my utmost to be fair and to seize every opportunity I have to impact positively the lives of the people that may come before me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to proceed going this way around the council. We'll start with Councilor Jubilee.
Thank you. I think you have a wonderful resume. So have two tremendous witnesses here today. George Ketchis comes in here, puts his stamp on some nominee. That's good enough for me. Voting for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Devaney.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you for all the time you afforded me, and you came a long way.
It's a pleasure.
I like your resume. I like your background. I like your experience. I really believe that people in their 30s really aren't ready to. I have seen so many people come before me who have not made it the first time, and then they came back when they were maybe 50, and they said, you know what, I learned so much from the time that I first applied. I needed that time. So I thank you for applying at this time. So what I wanted to ask you is, because we met, we talked a long time, one case, it really comes to mind, and I don't know whether it will to you, but tell me about Fred Shue. Share that story with these people.
Right?
Fred Shue.
Fred Shue?
Was he, I'm sorry, I got it wrong.
It's okay.
Forget that. I looked at your life experience, with your public experience. What do you think you bring to the bench from your personal experience?
I have to combine that somewhat with personal and professional because I think there's a tremendous overlap.
Yeah.
I've developed as a person, in large part with some of the professional experiences I've had. And certainly, I've developed knowledge of civil process and everything, and I can bring that to the bench. But I think more important, I recognize I have a lot to learn if my nomination is approved, particularly in the criminal arena and things in that area. But one of the things that I have learned over the course of dealing with folks is that when people come to me, they're in crisis. And it's for me, it was a learned skill over time to learn how to walk them through that crisis, not just in a way to sort of counsel them and listen to them and be understanding, but also in a way that they can be functional through it and bring them to the ability to make decisions about their cases. And that mostly is about listening. It's about true empathy and not just, the word service, because clients recognize that when you do that. And I think building relationships and rapport with clients is a transferable skill where I think most people that are in a courtroom are in some kind of crisis. And I think that when I've heard, defense counsel talk about temperament, I think much of that, perhaps some of it is natural, but I think a lot of that has been learned just in terms of dealing with my clients who are often coming to me in terrible situations. And so I think that that's an important aspect of what I hope to bring to the bench. And also, over the course of working all these years with these guys, it's a very busy practice. And I've sort of developed the habit of working long hours and just trying to get the best result. When you're dealing with the volume, that's not enough. You still have to do your best on every single case. And so that has meant a lot of long hours, and I think that is now habitual for me, and I hope to bring that to the bench as well.
You're a good writer. That's so important. Tell me about the writings that you included in your J&C on that case when they made a motion, a summary judgment. That was quite a case.
Well, I had to. I forgive me that it was kind of an older writing, but the application called for something that I did on my own, and I've been blessed with an associate who's a very good writer for a few years now, and so I didn't want to include something that was mostly my editing more so than my actual writing. So I went back. But yeah, that was a difficult case involving a couple young men who were severely injured when they went off the roadway, and we filed a claim against the paving company because fog lines had been removed in the process, and there was nothing set up to basically mark the turn. It was a difficult case, but we got by the summary judgment, and it concluded.
Right. You've done some writings. Okay, tell us about that article.
I did, one of the things I did was who was responsible for an injury on a residential construction site. We handle a lot of construction site injuries at my firm. Probably numbers-wise, auto is probably more, but in terms of the time commitment that takes for each case, construction cases are among the things that have taken up most of my time. And on residential construction sites, as opposed to commercial construction sites, sometimes the employment relationships are a little bit loosey-goosey. People work for one guy one day, they go to another project, and they got the job and somebody else. And so there's a lot of interplay between potential to file workers' compensation claims versus potential to file negligence claims, and then you might be looking at homeowners in certain instances. And so we cover the topics of from the plaintiff's perspective.
I've been reading a lot about buildings that are in Boston even that are in the process of being built and someone falls or gets killed or whatever. So you've had a lot of serious cases. One of them you had when a platform collapsed, and you even mentioned in your J&C about that case that you were against a very aggressive, very capable defense attorney who was and it was extremely challenging. Tell us about that.
I had two wonderful clients from the Cape. They were just the best salt of the earth people. He was significantly injured in it. One of these injuries that just couldn't get better. Surgery after surgery, getting bad results. We were in Barnstable County, we hit the case for, I think the verdict came back with $4 million, and so that was a great result there. We were very happy with it, and my clients are just wonderful people, and I couldn't have been happier to do that for them. And defense counsel was a great lawyer, a great litigator, and so certainly when you're in competition with someone that you respect as much as I respected him, it makes it that more gratifying to be successful.
I've been here a long time, and I don't see someone in that seat with your experience. My colleague is very experienced in this, and I'm sure that he will ask you questions. But I'm just wondering, what do you believe is the greatest contribution you can give with your experience in this particular field of law on the bench?
Well, from a practical standpoint, stepping away from temperament or fairness or those from a practical standpoint, I'm hoping I can help the court with the civil backlog. And all of my years of experience have been really in the civil arena. I have quite a learning curve ahead of me in the criminal arena, which I'm working on actively now, in the hopes that my nomination is approved. But I'm hoping that I can help the court get to some of those civil cases, because having been on the lawyering side of it, sometimes when people are hurt, being involved in litigation is very stressful for litigants. And when that process is delayed, bad things happen to families, and it's stressful.
For your interest, because so many times you have someone sitting there that has no criminal experience or has no civil experience. And I've asked, what have you done to prepare for this position? And they haven't done anything. You have. And I really, respect that. I think that's very important. So what do you think is what would be the most important learning curve to go into good on the bench in this position?
For me, most immediately is basically the jurisprudence on suppressing evidence in criminal matters.
Yeah.
In speaking with Counselor Hurley, she recommended Rebecca Grasso's book on suppressing matters. I bought that book, I'm reading it. It's not a quick read, but I'm making my way through it. But I started. We don't want to be on the bench and mess those things up. They're critically important.
No, that's great. That was a nice recommendation. Tell me your experience before being a lawyer on your own, and you were a law clerk. How do you think that helps for your experience to go on the bench? What did you learn?
Being a law clerk to the Superior Court judges was fabulous, just to see what happens in the back, to see the human side, to see how, to have those discussions with the judges, to hear them talk about the things that they didn't know and they needed you to research, and their sort of zealous search for the right result. I think that instilled, it basically sort of eliminated some of the awe and put it in a more practical perspective of the search for the right result, and how important that is, and the work that has to go into that. And that to me was very helpful. And I think it did, for the first time, make me think perhaps a future as a judge is a possibility.
Right. Well, it was such a pleasure to meet you. And like I said, I like your age. I think 52 is great. And I think, someone has not had the life experience. That is part of it, what comes being on the bench, what you have lived through. I have to tell you, you had the same birthday as my mom, November 11th. And my mom called it Armistice Day all her life. She never, because when she was a little girl, that's what it was. So, she respected veterans and Veterans Day, but it was Armistice Day, the war to end all wars. But I did notice that. So, how did you get into this particular area of law? What interests you?
Initially, I got into it sort of by default. I had graduated from college, and initially after college, I took an unpaid internship at the Attorney General's office. So after my first year of law school, I needed a paying job, and Ketch's Law Group was in Taunton, not too far from Fall River. We had to juggle cars, so I had transportation was an issue, but they paid for law clerks. Back then, there were a lot of positions that were allowed that were unpaid. So I took the position. And as I got into it, I really did appreciate, number one, the quality of work that Ketch's Law Group was doing. And as I got to do more and more meaningful things on the cases, I began to appreciate the combination of sort of the problem-solving analytical aspects of building a case, but also the very human side of making a real difference to people that need your help. And I thought that it was a nice combination, and I sort of learned something about myself, that I was comfortable there, and that I was not as comfortable doing something that was, more perhaps less analytical and more the social work side. And then I didn't want to be someplace that was strictly analytical either. I liked the combination. It was a good fit for me, and I feel like I've grown and thrived in that atmosphere, and it's been a good fit.
You've had long cases, 3 years cases, and these are real, public cases that we've read about in the newspaper. Tell me, I always ask the nominee, going back to your journey here, you applied when?
I think I first submitted my application in early December.
December 2021.
21.
When did you get the interview with the judicial nominee?
I don't recall that date, but I think it was in late February.
February, okay. And there's 21 lawyers that have the ultimate authority that we don't have to decide who's going to get an interview at their JNC hearing and who they're going to recommend to the governor. How many of those 21 were there?
They submitted, they split it up into halves.
Don't tell me that they split. How many were there?
I had, I think 11 or 12 people there.
11 to 12. So 9 people voted for you, never saw you, never came in here, never called you. And you're qualified, believe me. But I just keep saying this publicly, if no one hears. And in this administration, that JNC has never had 21 people at a hearing. And
Devaney, I just want to remind you, you're about 15 minutes right now.
you know what? We are timed. Can you please? We are the only elected body, federal, state, and local, that we are timed. As a member, I am timed, so I cannot ask you any more questions. It's outrageous, because I want people out there to know as much as they can about you, how you qualified.
Thank you. Council Iannella. Thank you. You're welcome.
Only in this chamber. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Counselor.
You're welcome.
We had a lengthy conversation, you and I, very impressed, with your resume. You've done a great job, at Catchies. Standing career. Any questions, I think George and I think Sean, I mean, it's one unbelievable, people. Not only are they really good attorneys, but they're good people. And that's, to me, more important than they're really super employed, say, good people. The fact that you work there, you're close to them, when your name becomes before the council, I'd be more than happy to vote for you. I did get a call right away from Ferreira. But as soon as your name was submitted, I said, oh, and he told me, I wrote down strong support right there, and that means a lot to me, too.
Council Iannella. Councilor Duff.
Thank you. Nice to see you. Great resume.
Thank you.
Very interesting. I'm fascinated by, you donated $1,000 to the DCCC and then $100 to the National Right to Life. I mean, that's kind of fascinating to me.
It's, yeah, I have friends that I've supported. I've had issues that I've supported. I've tried to basically be true to my conscience and also be a true friend to people.
That's great. I appreciate that very much. Do you think, particularly in the world that we're in right now with Roe falling, that you can be impartial on those issues if you're on the Superior Court?
I do. I think we are bound by the law, and I intend to follow the law, and I will. And I have a conscience that I follow, but certainly as a judge, part of that conscience is following the oath that I take.
So what and correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I don't want to put words in your mouth. Because we have, at least 3 U.S. Supreme Court judges that essentially lied under oath when it came to this particular issue. They said, well, the recent decision shows that they don't believe there is any such thing as settled law. Do you believe there is such thing as settled law?
There is such a thing as settled law, certainly, and as a Superior Court judge, I'm not an appellate justice. I am bound to follow settled law.
Okay. And would you uphold the law in Massachusetts where women have the right to make decisions, they have autonomy on their own body?
I would be bound to uphold the law in Massachusetts.
Law?
I would uphold the law in Massachusetts.
The law, but would you uphold that law? I need you to tell me, and I said the same thing to Justice Graziano when he was up here for the state Supreme Court. I need to know that you support a woman's right to choose as a judge. I don't care what you do personally, that's none of my business, right? Your religion's none of my business. But as a woman, and you having this great power, when we are really at a very dangerous place in this country right now, not just this issue, but a lot of other issues. I need to know with absolute certainty that you would uphold a woman's right to choose in Massachusetts.
It's hard for me to imagine under what scenario that particular question would come before a Superior Court judge. I've not seen that, I'm not privy to that. I can only tell you that I would judge every matter before me in accordance with the law and uphold the law.
That's not an answer. It's an answer, but you're avoiding the question, which I have to be really honest, it concerns me. And I respect your personal views, but again, I have to say, we're at a time where people have said things and then they don't do them. And I agree with you. I don't know any circumstances come before the Superior Court. I don't. But then again, it could. And I don't know any circumstance where we would have a sitting president who would try to overthrow the government. But guess what? It apparently happened. From what we're watching at the hearings, it was more serious than I think many of us who actually watched it live thought. So, that this is a very difficult issue, because just saying I will uphold the law, the U.S. Supreme Court just overturned a law that they all told us was settled and could never be overturned, yet they did. And it affects over 51% of the country. It affects people whose lives are now at risk if they have an ectopic pregnancy. They've literally been told by the highest court in this land that they're going to have to die because they're not going to be able to terminate that pregnancy, even though the pregnancy wouldn't be viable. I mean, that's what just happened. There is a vicious war on women in this country right now. And I have no problem with you having your own devout faith and belief in that. But the separation of church and state has become incredibly blurred. And this is one of the main issues. So I can't just have, I will uphold the law. I need you to say, I will defend a woman's right to choose under the laws of Massachusetts.
I think that you're asking me to promise you a result on a case that is not yet before me and that I can't even imagine at this point.
I am.
And so I can't.
Excuse me, I don't mean to be rude and interrupt, but that is exactly what I'm doing. You're absolutely right. That is exactly what I'm doing.
And I think it would be contrary to judicial temperament for me to try to say how I would rule on a case that isn't before me and that I haven't seen.
I understand that.
That I would look at the facts before me and apply the law.
I understand that as well, but what I'm not getting is what your reading of the law would be. And I understand that you don't want to answer the question. I really get it. I get it. And I understand what you're saying. But this could be a deal breaker for me. I really like you, but this is really, we are in the brink of civil war in this country. I've been saying it for years in this chamber, and people thought I was kidding. But we know we are. And, I've never had to make that choice. But I sure as hell am not going to tell somebody else what they have to do with their body. No law can tell you that. No law can tell you that. It's just, I need to know that women in this state are protected, that the autonomy and the right to control their bodies is protected. And I do understand that if, you're really, I understand what I'm asking you is speculation. I really do. I get it. And I appreciate that you were quick enough to understand that. But that's where we're at. That is truly where we're at right now. So I'm not going to badger you because I don't want to badger you. I think you're terrific. I think you're smart. I think you're a terrific lawyer. And that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Kennedy.
I have to be honest with you, your answer to Councilor Duff's question was a little troubling. It sounded a lot like Justice Kavanaugh, who then went in the opposite direction when he had the opportunity. So that was a little troubling. But that aside, I do agree with you that the likelihood of that particular issue coming before Superior Court judge is very, very small. I suspect for the next 5 years, you're gonna be handling, a lot of commercial litigation and, personal injury cases on the civil side. That's usually what happens to the new judges, as I'm sure you're aware. And unlike a lot of them that we, approve, you have some experience in that area, which, most of the people seem to come out of the criminal law. Prosecutors on who've never seen a civil case in their life. And I think it's important that we have people there that have some experience. I do some personal civil work, mostly criminal, but I do some of that. So I think that's important, like, for balance. You have some great witnesses here today. Obviously, I have a lot of respect for of your witnesses, a long time. And like Council Ainella, Council Ferreira hit me over the head the first week when we were nominated. Kind of a pain in the butt. So I have to, I got to listen to them a little bit sometimes. So I appreciate your testimony. I don't have any more questions for you.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Councilor Kennedy. Councilor DiPaolo.
Thank you, Counselor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You have great civil experience, the kind we need in Superior Court, as my colleague just said. I do want to ask you a little bit about the criminal side of things, since that will be fairly new to you, right? So I'll just go through what you had to say in your application about exercising judicial discretion. So you wrote, with the overall goal of reducing crime for the protection of society, the seriousness of the crime and the impact to the victim and the community are important. I recognize, however, the characteristics of the offender may indicate a sentence focused on rehabilitation is often the best path to minimize recidivism. So when you're thinking about that, how are you going to evaluate a situation with a potential criminal defendant in terms of when rehab will work, when rehab won't work, how to craft what you'd be doing as a judge?
Sure, and it's, obviously, it's very theoretical for me at this point, because I've not had experience on the criminal side.
Right. Which is why it's so important to hear what you have.
Right. I mean, I've read the advisory sentencing guidelines. I've read a lot of the evidence-based social science data that have come out, including the Harvard-based study that I know you're familiar with. Yeah. And I understand some of the issues, particularly where you look at, I think, a criminal offender's previous record, that they may have more interactions with police depending on the neighborhood they're from. So I think some of those things are things that we have to keep in mind. On the other hand, this is the Superior Court, where most of the time the crimes that we're talking about are very serious crimes that have serious impact to the victims. And so, I can walk 5 minutes from my house and be in a high crime neighborhood. I understand what in those places means to the communities. But you have to judge every case on its merits based on the person that's in front of you. But the person that's in front of you is the offender and the victim, or the victim's community, potentially. But I just am trying to make myself more aware of some of the things that can be in a person's background that could suggest that rehabilitation may be successful. I am particularly impressed with the idea of recognizing your own personal biases when considering sentencing. I think we all have them, and I think that it's important to recognize them so that you can try to minimize the effects of those biases, just being aware of those. I was impressed in the Harvard study with the decision points that, whether or not, what charges are brought, whether or not it's prosecuted in district court versus Superior Court. These are all issues that matter in terms of how an offender may come before me. It's hard for me to say the list of things that I would look at and consider. Certainly, I think the list of aggravating factors and mitigating factors that is set forth in the guidelines are good food for thought. I don't think it necessarily ends there.
So let's look at a couple of those. So as far as you've mentioned a couple of times, the impact on the victim in a crime. So how does that, because of course that's so subjective to who the victim happens to be, right? So, and the context in which the crime happened. So how does the impact on the victim either mitigate or aggravate a potential sentencing decision?
Because
does it? And if so, how does it?
Because I think it's important that everybody that comes before the criminal justice system feels that they've received justice. And I think that's true both from the victim's perspectives and the people's perspective and the offender's perspective. And that's very hard to achieve.
Yeah.
And so,
So I would say, I understand we want the victim to be heard and have the opportunity to see the justice happen, right? But I'm wondering, in the dispassionate application of the law, how the particular impact on a particular defendant would change a sentencing decision from hypothetical offender A to hypothetical offender B. If the difference is the impact on the victim, does that have a role to play in the judicial discretion to apply the law?
I think it does. However, as you know, with every case, there's not just,
Well, so stop there then. Why does it and how does it?
because I think it's important that victims who are often, from the same neighborhoods and communities and may well be offenders themselves also feel like they have a place in the criminal justice system. I think it does matter.
So here's my hypothetical. So what if someone who's who has no family, a loner, an isolated individual, is the victim of a crime or is murdered, God forbid, compared to someone murdered with a family, with children? I mean, is it a worse crime? Does it impact the sentence because we have victims who are in the courtroom to talk about it as opposed to the murder victim with no folks in the courtroom to talk about it? I mean, to me, it seems like the crimes are very similar, and I'm wondering why the sentencing considerations would be different.
No, I think in your limited hypothetical that they wouldn't be different, but I can envision a time where a victim may come before you expressing forgiveness to the offender versus the victim who feels repeatedly, victimized by the system. I think those kinds of nuances. But as we know, there's a multitude of factors that need to go into sentencing consideration. I'm merely saying that I can see.
The sentencing guidelines, as you mentioned.
I've not memorized them, but I've certainly read them.
Well, sure, of course not. So, well, let me skip to this. Have you visited a house of corrections or any institution in our Commonwealth?
I did have to tour the disciplinary unit of Cedar Junction when I was a law clerk.
Okay.
Case
That was a while ago, right?
Yeah.
Would you commit to visiting houses of corrections and jails where potentially defendants would be sent?
I would have no problem doing that, yeah.
Would you do that
Sure.
as soon as possible, kind of make it part of your
Sure.
introduction? I think that's really important. As far as personal biases, the last thing I'll ask you about, I'm glad you acknowledged that we all have personal biases. I'm getting, and this isn't about you, when I talk to judges and nominees, I know that implicit bias is a thing that's talked about and it's relative to the Harvard study. But I look at it and it's more like, I don't think we have strike that. I don't think we're appointing blatantly racist judges. I don't think the personal bias is the issue. I think the issue for me, when I read the Harvard study, as you noted, is the accumulation of impacts in the system that have impacted communities of color. And so when I think about a judge exercising discretion and thinking about crafting what's going on and realizing that the Black or Latino defendant in front of me in Superior Court was twice as likely to be there than a white defendant when there's concurrent jurisdiction between district and superior. So like that stuff's real. But whether or not you personally are that you need to check, like, let me make sure I'm not being harsh on this person because they're Black, for example, that doesn't worry me in the least. But what I hope for judges is that the considerations around how the person got there are part of what matters. And you alluded to that a little bit. Do you understand? Was I clear on that? And so what do you think about that? The institutional pieces, the systemic pieces that land the person there, not so much that you might harbor, ill intent or whatever it might be.
I think having an awareness that those exist are an important part of the considerations that you're looking at. But when I think of what a judge sitting on a superior court, has the defendant come before them and now there's an issue of sentencing, the kinds of implicit biases that immediately come to mind for me are things like, things I recognized about myself when I started interviewing candidates for employment. You like the person that you can relate to the most, and then you realize, well, is that really the right criteria? And then you start realizing, let me separate that, because we don't want to have a law firm of everybody who's just like me. So let's start looking at other perspectives, and it's kind of taking those steps. And I think it's a different scale, but the same is true if you're looking at a defendant and you can't relate to them for whatever reason. Do you feel like they pose more of a threat to society than you would somebody who committed the same crime, but somehow you relate to them?
So a young man in a high crime area with whatever happened in their family life growing up who's caught with a firearm, right? And they're not, and sometimes they're caught with a firearm for very nefarious reasons. And sometimes it's literally self-defense, that they're literally afraid in their neighborhood themselves. Is that the kind of thing that impacts your decision?
That would certainly impact my decision. I think that's a different issue than implicit bias, but that impacts my decision as to the totality of circumstances as to what.
I'm not sure it is, because the white kid in the rural communities I represent is not ever gonna face that experience. I just don't, but in some of the neighborhoods in Worcester where I live, that's a very, very real thing. I appreciate your time. I'm gonna hold it there. Thank you. Thank you, Counselor.
So it's my turn.
I have 3 minutes
Um,
by your rule.
yeah, after me though, I get to go, right? All right. You want 3 minutes now? Go ahead. You got 3 minutes.
Thank you. We have a 3-minute rule too. I just wanted to note that you have been awarded lawyer, top women in the law, and at the same time, small middle. I think that should be said. The other thing is, I wanted to mention that you have had real notarized cases, and I have seen them on TV, and I've read them in the Boston Globe. And one of them was horrific in Boston, right out here, that a man was in a crane, it collapsed, he was crushed to death. So I want to ask you about, do you ever follow up with a client after the case is over? Because what I saw in you when I met with you is compassion. So there's got to be. Okay, can you answer that?
With that client in particular, I have, I still get Christmas cards and from her, and I've watched her. His son was, I think, 2 when he was killed, and I've got to see him grow over the years, and just a wonderful lady, a pillar of strength, the widow in that case. And I, particularly the cases where we've tried, when you try a case with a client, you're really in the trenches with them, and you're kind of living in their shoes, and they're living in yours for the period of the trial. And most of those folks I have stayed in touch with.
Yeah, that's great. Well, the other thing is, I have to say, after 23 years, you are the first person coming before me that has the legal background that you're bringing to the bench. And I think it's important that we have people from, all type of legal background to, to be there to support people. I met you, we talked for hours, you came a long distance from your neighborhood, and I really enjoyed it, and every minute of it, and I'm just pleased, first of all, that you applied, second of all, that they're finally getting people 52 years old, okay? Because that is important, because I'll tell you, I have had so many people in my 23 years that have said, I was rejected before, but I've learned so much more, and I really wasn't ready. You're ready. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I don't have any questions. I think you're an extraordinary candidate. Just a quick comment on the question about abortion. I was a Superior Court law clerk too, and I thought it was unbelievable. A great way to start a career, but I can't envision any circumstance where a Superior Court judge is going to make any real decision about abortion in Massachusetts. It's going to be, it's legislated, and the SJC would interpret anything, not a Superior Court judge. So I appreciate you applying. I appreciate that you're going to take a substantial pay cut, because that's not true for all people that come before us, quite honestly. And it's nice of you to want to give back to society. So I'm glad you applied. I'm thrilled to vote for you next week, and look forward to seeing you on the bench today. Thank you. This hearing is concluded.
Letter for the record, June 29, 2022, Executive Council, Council Chamber, State House, Boston, Mass. Dear councilors, I'm pleased to nominate Jason Yu-Ting Chan. Did I have that right?
Yes, Counselor.
To the position of Associate Justice in the District Court, I submit the nomination for the advice and consent of the Executive Council pursuant to Part 2, Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm closing the nominee's resume for your convenience. Sincerely, Charles D. Baker. The vice is the Honorable Andrew D'Angelo. Okay? So with that, we'll start by asking any witnesses that are here if they want to give a statement or if they wish to waive any statements. We have Attorney John Seed here, and we know you're going to say wonderful things about this nominee. We will put that right on the record now.
That's true. I'd waive my statement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other, Mike Walsh is here, the selectman in Westwood.
I think I would waive any statement I need. I think Mr.
Take that as an affirmative that you're for this candidate. Anybody against? Anybody against? Hearing none. It is, you have the floor. You have the option of waiving your statement, and we know you're thankful for the governor, lieutenant governor, the JNC, the governor's council, and everybody else in this building for being here. You wish to waive?
Yes, please.
Okay, we'll start with Councilor Ianello.
Thank you very much. We had a lengthy conversation. I was impressed with your resume, your witnesses, fantastic. I did get a call from Tom Keating, big supporter. Tacky Chan, representative, another super guy. Your own counselor, Counselor Juneville, your name was nominated. He called me. That was enough for me. Look forward to voting for you next week.
Thank you, Councilor Kennedy.
Ditto. We had a nice meeting in my office. She answered all my questions. I'll be voting for you next week.
Thank you. Councilor DePaulo.
Thank you. You're well aware of how supportive I am of your nomination. I was very glad to see it come down. I appreciate all the work you do, especially in the Worcester community. And I don't have any questions for you. You know where my vote is on this. So congratulations.
Thank you. I agree with the other councilors questioning and what they've said. And I'm going to be proud to put your name before the council next week for a vote. And I'm voting for you also. So with that, meeting's over.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you all.
Would you, hey,
Good luck.
hey,